it's important for us to look at that and to say to someone, hey, how you feel, if you literally have never felt full, then as a society, having told you to eat until you're 80% full is literally like, go chase a rainbow. Like, we have no idea. Like, you don't know what that destination point is, so you can't figure out what 80% of something you don't know what it feels like is, on that part. If somebody needs this tool and this tool is actually part of what helps them, then our job is to personalize their nutrition and their medicine to make sure that we reduce the risk of negative side effects, and we continue to use that, tool to optimize. So anyway, that's the two worlds pulling part of the difference between how everybody needs switch optimization. That should be a part of metabolic health. Whether or not we use a tool like a GLP-1 agonist is going to depend on where their switch is today, what kind of dysfunction, and what support they need as we move it along. It's a cool process. It's something we all need to be practicing, and labs play a critical role in doing it today.
Ashley Koff, welcome to the Root Cause Medicine podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited about the conversation.
Me too. So you are an expert in personalized nutrition, and it feels like there's a ton of really important new trends that are emerging in this space. And two of the topics that we're seeing a lot in the media right now are GLP-1s and SPMs. And that's why I reached out to you. I saw you do some pretty cool podcasts and pieces on these. And I thought, what a great time to bring Ashley in to educate us. You also have experience in this area as an RD, helping people with issues that they're typically going to wonder about these interventions or modulators for. Yeah. And so let's talk about GLP-1 medications. How do you explain to people in the context of their whole person care about what GLP-1 is, and when and if they may want to consider adding something that modulates that to their treatment plan?
So the most important thing to start off with is there is a world of synthetic hormones, thyroid hormone, insulin, testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, all the ones on that part that we can now include as semaglutide and tirzepatide, where we're getting synthetic GLP-1, synthetic GIP. So those are your peptide hormones. The reason I mentioned peptide hormones is, of course, we should remember that hormones are made from proteins or fats. So in this case, they're not steroid hormones, they're peptide hormones, they're made from protein. So your protein intake is going to matter. All right, so we have that world, and those are exogenous. And those are a tool that we can use to help people for life. And we can also use them as a tool to help people at moments. Then we have how the human body is physiologically designed. So we're not Gila monsters. Gila monsters are the ones that their venom is what was used to create the synthetic version. We're humans. And so in the human body, what happens is we have a series of like motion detector, or what I call switch hormones, pilot lights, use whatever term you want to. Their entire job is to just flip on in the presence of certain signals. And then as a result of flipping on, when they flip on, they basically send out messages, go do this. Now you go do this. Now you go do this. So I think it's important that we don't just isolate GLP-1. When GLP-1, CCK, and PYY, I call them your metabolic switch hormones. When they get the signals, vagus nerve stimulation, environmental stimulation, protein as a stimulation, when they get that stimuli that shows up, they switch on. And they tell insulin, leptin, glucose, whatever to go to work and to do its job. And then within minutes, they're degraded and they go away. An enzyme comes in, breaks them down, and sends them away. Now, what we're learning is we've got a lot of receptor sites for these particular hormones. Why is that important? If in the 2 minutes that didn't get to all those receptor sites, some of those receptor sites may go unsatiated on that part. Now, it also could be that from a genetic standpoint and from a dysfunction standpoint based on life choices or health or other things, you could have a delay. So those hormones could switch on, but maybe they switch on 10 or 15 minutes too late. So you don't get the message on that part. And so what we've seen is that these hormones are foundational in weight health. And I use the term weight health because I'd like to take the focus off of, it's not about your actual body mass. It's about the composition of your body. So fat mass, lean body mass, types of fat mass, et cetera on that part. And then your health, your blood sugar, your overall metabolic health on that part. So these guys are really important. And what we've historically done is address things like diabetes and weight up at this like higher level pre-switch. Like we haven't gone in and been like, hey, is your switch working? And so if you imagine, if the motion detector doesn't go off or the switch doesn't go off, that's a big issue. And so we have a lot of people today, millions and millions of people, whose switches are, as I've identified, either dysfunctional or they're delayed or they're fully operational, but they're suppressed. The choices, the other things that are going on are actually suppressing the body, so the body isn't experiencing that optimal result. Now, we don't have a lab test yet. Anyone who's working on it, and definitely let me know, and we'll get it into Rupa, right at the moment. But remember, I told you those hormones get degraded in like 2 minutes. So we don't have a lab that we can say, oh, your switch is dysfunctional or your switch is delayed. We don't have a pre-diabetes and a diabetes here. So instead, I've basically come up with a way of evaluating if somebody's switch needs optimization. So we get signals. We have to ask about digestion because these hormones are made in the lining of the digestive tract. We want to look at genetics. Are you more likely to be insulin resistant, leptin resistant? Do you have the snack gene? Do you have just certain things that are, going on there? We have to look at just metabolic health and see certain things there. So we can look at different and gather different data. And when we look at the data that says that like 93% of the population is considered metabolically unhealthy, I think we have to be very careful about setting up and saying to somebody, oh, do this because this is, what healthy means. So they literally didn't even know what it meant on that part. A little bit of a tangent. However, it's important for us to look at that and to say to someone, hey, how you feel, if you literally have never felt full, then as a society, having told you to eat until you're 80% full is literally like, go chase a rainbow. Like we have no idea. Like you don't know what that destination point is. So you can't figure out what 80% of something you don't know what it feels like is, on that part. If somebody needs this tool and this tool is actually part of what helps them, then our job is to personalize their nutrition and their medicine to make sure that we reduce the risk of negative side effects, and we continue to use that, tool to optimize. So anyway, that's the two worlds pulling part of the difference between how everybody needs switch optimization. That is our metabolic, that should be a part of metabolic health. Whether or not we use a tool like a GLP-1 agonist is going to depend on where their switch is today, what kind of dysfunction and what support they need, as we move it along. So it's a cool process. It's something we all need to be practicing, and labs play a critical role in doing it today.
Love it. We're going to talk about those labs in a second. I want to circle back to something. So the GLP-1 and the CCK, right? These peptides are produced by a healthy gut in response to sort of optimal nutrient intake and absorption. And so can we just briefly list out, when we think about switch optimizing interventions, what is the short list that we're about to cover?
Yeah, totally. And I think there's a short list of, we've got to make sure the lining of the digestive tract, because it's metabolically active. I think for too long, we've thought of it as a tube. And what was really important was what was going on inside of the tube. And things like celiac and gluten intolerance, and others they started to leaky gut. They started to teach us the health of the lining is important. No, it's essential. I don't even think of glutamine as a conditionally essential amino acid. The conditions of 2024 are that we need to make sure that we're getting in enough glutamine to make sure that the glue, the lining, that's occurring. So I would say that, the digestive side is going to be real important. And then we have to look at the signals. So protein, fats, little bit on the carbohydrate side, but these nutrients are signals for these hormones to then work, but they're also part of your proteins, and the type of your protein and the type of the amino acid is going to be part of what actually forms them, right? When you're looking at PYY, right? It's tyrosine there. When looking at GLP-1, it's the glucagon-like peptide. So we've got to make sure that we're getting in those proteins there. And then we really have to look on that other side of better nutrition, which is what are all the things that irritate, overwhelm, and disrupt it? So am I on certain medications, or do I have a history of being on those medications that have, hampered it? Am I drinking alcohol? So if I drink alcohol, we know that there's inflammation in the lining of the digestive tract. And I'm not saying you can't have alcohol, but if I'm drinking alcohol, that might be part of my switch suppression, or it may be exacerbating a dysfunctional or a delayed switch on that part. So how do I look at that piece? So that's kind of and hydration. Water actually going into the cells. So not drinking water. We have to reframe the definition of hydration, or bring it back to what it actually is, which is the body's actually being able, you're a sponge, not a hose. You're actually taking in the nutrients and the water inside the cells, or moving things, where they need to go on that part.
Brilliant. Okay. So assessing the health of the gut lining, removing or reducing anything that's irritating it, making sure it's functioning optimally and it's healthy, making sure your body has the amino acids that it needs to build these peptides, and making sure that you're consuming a diet that will actually trigger the release of these peptides in the digestive tract is like, just seems like for everyone a really good switch optimization list.
Yes, and as you said it, it reminded me, how in the world can we forget then stress? So stress and vagus nerve, right? So we got to get our vagus nerve activated. But what we know about our vagus nerve is it comes in and we're providing signals there to the lining in terms of making sure that our digestion is working optimally. So that, I think, also brings us to breathing. That brings us to, sort of kind of like headaches, like just all the vagus nerve stimulation work of connecting brain to gut and optimizing that as well. Yeah.
Beautiful. So we're going to have some folks who are listening to this who are thinking, okay, I've done all that. I'm still really struggling. Like, I'm starving after meals. I have cravings I can't control. It seems like all my friends are going on these like GLP-1 receptor agonists. How do I evaluate if this is something I should consider, the risks that come with it? How do you have this conversation with people who have already done all the optimization we just talked about?
Yeah, totally. And so remember, you don't get to do the optimization and then check a box and move on. So it's, are you committed to the ongoing optimization? And yet in doing that, you're still not seeing the results, the better health outcomes. So do we need an agent to support us there? So you mentioned things like, I feel hungry, or I don't feel full. Some people will talk like a lot about something that we call food noise, where if you think about distracted driving, that's probably the closest, like where you almost can't function. So like if you just said the word lemon right now, I actually hear the word lemon bar and I start thinking about a lemon bar. And now I'm like kind of listening to you, Kate, but like I'm also thinking about, gosh, should I have lunch? Or if I was sitting here and all of a sudden I'm just like eating a bar and you're like, ooh, am I hungry? Should I have something? So like, people will talk about it where, it's very real. It's like their whole day. And this has come out of orthorexia too, trying to eat perfectly, but their whole day is distracted by their thoughts around food. I've had people say to me, I'm not able to be present at a meal and a really important, like a birthday party or something else, because I'm just thinking about, do I have the cake? Do I not have the cake? That kind of thing. So there can be a variety of different reasons. We could also be looking at our metabolic health and saying there are too many signals here that I just don't like. My numbers are creeping up, or I'm trying all of these things and I'm not seeing the continuous glucose monitor look like rolling hills, or whatever it is on that part. So then we have to look at, let's talk about the side effect one right out the door, because I think, what are the risks associated with a medication? Okay. So there are risks associated with any medication. And the fact that we don't focus more on the risks associated with aspirin and nonsteroidal anti-inflammatories, the NSAIDs like Tylenol, et cetera, more, and we're so focused on the GLP-1 ones is really interesting to me, because we have very clear information, or proton pump inhibitors, or statins, et cetera. So when we invite an ingredient to come into the body and to replace or to amplify or to totally shift directions and have the body do something different, that is an important thing for us to be aware of. So as a practitioner, the way that I've always thought about it was, a doctor puts their patient, has a reason they put a patient on a medication. They send them over to me to have the conversation about what impact is this going to have on your body and how can we correct for it? How can we optimize? How can we support it? So if you're on a statin, we're going to get some CoQ10 in there. We're going to look at your testosterone. We might need to boost your testosterone, look at different things. So we want to make sure that, we want to come in and do that supportive work. So when you look at an agonist, you want to basically say, first and foremost, I just told you that these hormones are made in the lining of the digestive tract. We have to make sure that not coming into going on an agonist, but the whole time you're on an agonist, that we're consistently evaluating your digestion. And if when you go up a dose from a 10 to a 20, if now you're constipated, stop. Let's get you less constipated. If now you have nausea, stop. Let's address the nausea. And maybe for some people, let's even proactively talk to you about what could happen and have some things available, or have you trial some things. I had a young woman who her parents were a little bit nervous, but we talked about it. And I was like, look, I've talked to her. I feel very comfortable with this. She's a college student. I said, I'm good. Let's put her on the semaglutide. Her doctor, psychiatrist was like really excited about this. Maybe we can reduce some of the psychiatric medications, et cetera, on that part, psychotherapist. Anyway, on that piece. And she was doing great. The medication working great. I get a panic call and 3 text messages. I was letting her text me. That's a part of my system. So it wasn't inappropriate. And she's like, I am having the worst. Like I think I need to go to the ER. I feel like I'm, and I was like, okay, so first and foremost, when we lose weight quickly, which I knew had happened, and I just talked to her like a week ago and she was doing beautifully. She'd lost weight, all this stuff. And she was at home and she was now back at college. So in that space, I was like, we do have to evaluate your gallbladder. Like maybe your gallbladder or maybe, something could be going on. And then I asked the question, have you pooped? And she said, no, I haven't pooped. And I said, has it been a couple of days? And she's like, now that you come to say, yeah, it's been a couple of days. I said, when did you get your period? And she's like, I'm about to get my period. I said, okay. And I said, also, I recall you were at your parents', like, did you, and you're now back at school, so you flew? And she's like, yeah. And it was actually a really long day of flying. Normally I take 1 flight, we took 2 flights. I said, okay. And I said, by the way, have you had any coffee? She said, no, my stomach is hurting so bad. I haven't had any coffee. And I said, okay, you have removed everything going on that was possibly helping you poop. And right now you are so backed up and bloated. I was like, we got to get you pooping. So I had her we started on some magnesium, some vitamin C. I had her have her coffee. I did say to her, I was like, look, if you were feeling pain, go to the emergency room, which she ultimately ended up doing. And that was totally fine. Got the clean bill of health there. But this was an issue there where for her, and what this would be is this is what the media would report as a side effect. And many also doctors would take her off the medication or would say like, let's not. Now, what we did end up doing with her is we said, let's not increase your medication for a couple of weeks. You're doing great. You're losing weight. Here's this. You're starting school again. Like we don't need to change it. So when we talk about side effects, we have to recognize, number one, what is already going on in your body? If your body is, if we're making a decision to use a medication, we're already identifying that there is dysfunction on some level somewhere. And so we need to make sure that we're doing whatever we can to optimize that. And then that we also have in place ways to gauge it. This is another one that drives me absolutely insane, is the information out there that if you go on these medications, when you come off them, you will lose all of your body weight and then some. Okay, all that is told me is whoever is prescribing it, or if you're buying it off the internet and you're not working with a practitioner, this is a shame on you. Where was the intervention when you gained 5 pounds? Why would you, if you lost 50 pounds originally and you gained 60 back, the moment that you gain 5 pounds back as we reduced your dose, or as you had to, even if you had to come off the medication, what I do is when I'm taking somebody off the medications, and it's not just I do, this is what I'm teaching, this is what we as practitioners do. We look at, let's have something in place. And that's going to include measuring your weight and your body fat. And and your lean body mass, and if you're not getting better results, or you're maintaining your results, then we're going to have to turn around and say, stop. And is our option to put you back on some of the medication, or is our option, we need to intervene, we need to do something different? Similarly, if you were telling me that these medications cause people to lose muscle, that is a completely false statement. And there's a very well-known doctor that's out there saying this, and I've responded to him like this on there. He's like, I do DEXA scans before and during, or before and after. Great. So you've told me you've done one thing well, assessment. Everything else is a problem. This is why doctors, you should work with nutritionists who can do the truly personalized nutrition. If you see on a DEXA scan muscle loss, then you do an intervention and you turn around and you say, okay, your protein intake, or maybe your digestion isn't working well enough. And even though you're taking in a good amount of protein, we're not actually able, that's not proving out in terms of it getting where it needs to go. Or maybe the amino acid blend isn't right, or whatever it is on that part. When you're a doctor who tells me that you have a patient that did a DEXA before and after and they lost too much muscle, that is, you are not practicing right. You don't have a good system. Like that's what that is. And I will be as blunt as day on that part. So yes, there are side effects to the medication. We're learning there are receptor sites in all sorts of parts of the body. And many of the side effects are really positive ones. There might be inflammation. There might be helping with fatty liver. There might be like all sorts of really good things. There could be negative things. There could be people don't want to eat. They forget to eat. They could be backloading in the day. They could be dehydrated. There are so many things. That's not why we blame a medication. That's where we say that the use of medication needs to be done better. And this is where I will intervene and say, I find it extremely problematic. When I worked in bariatrics, it was mandated for your surgery to be covered. You had to be working with a dietitian, at least a before and an after, I think one visit on that part. I do not know how it is that these medications, I do know how it is, but the fact that pharma has released these medications and now that they're direct to consumer without a practitioner, somebody who's just scripting, behind the scenes or whatever, and that you can get these and there isn't a practitioner involved. And I know not every practitioner practices the way that we all do. And so somebody might not be working with a better practitioner, but at least you're working with a practitioner, and then the fault is in that collaboration there. So I think when we talk about side effects, we have to be really careful to make sure that what they should be doing is they should be alerting us to what our system as a practitioner, again, needs to cover. And this is where we go back to what you said, Kate, before, which is if you're listening and all of a sudden you're like, I don't think I can do this, good, I've done my job. Because I have way too many practitioners out there who have been telling me, coming up at conferences, et cetera, and saying, I know, but my patients are just like kind of bullying me into scripting this. They just want it. And I'm like, okay, so first of all, you're not like Target. You don't just turn around and say like the designer version, okay, we just have this knockoff for you. You turn around and you say, no, like, hey, if you're going to do this, sign a contract with me that you're going to work with my practitioner. And here's what the cost of that looks like. And this is how I'm going to do it, because otherwise we're not going to get those, better outcomes on that part. And then I think it's really important for us to also say that what if you come off the medication? You do it beautifully. You do the, this Ashley Koff RD way. And I'm like, I've come off, I'm maintaining, I've got my check-ins, I'm checking up on my digestion, I'm doing all this stuff. And then life happens. Guess what? It's going to. Life happens and unfortunately you get a divorce. Life happens and super positively you get pregnant. Life happens and you decide to train for an Ironman. Life happens and unfortunately you lose your job and your healthcare and don't have money, or you're just stressed out. Life is going to happen and you may need a tool again. And that does not mean you are a failure. And it doesn't mean that a world in which we can use this tool intermittently is not a better world. We now have a tool that we didn't have before. I'm so grateful for it. I just think we all have to become better users of that tool.
Brilliant. I mean, what I've heard you say so far is really making sure your clients are prepared for the entire journey, including the nutrition journey, making sure that you've done informed consent. I think what I'd like us to cover really briefly, what are the nutrition considerations that may be unique to someone who is on a GLP-1 medication? And what I'm thinking is a very short list, like eating for optimal gastric motility, consuming enough protein and total calories. Like, what's your short list so that somebody who's listening, who's interested in this, can think, oh, okay, I need to make sure this at a basic level. My patients are prepared. They'll need to work with me to get good outcomes with this medication.
Yeah, totally. So first of all, let's use the term total nutrition. So if they're not able to get it in from food, that's the role of supplements. And that's how those two things can be complemented together, right? And that's a good lead into maybe you want to, we like to do it, like to test nutrient status, because if there's something deficient or insufficient before, it's likely to get worse. And so do I need to adjust, the supplementation? And also, can they tolerate the supplementation that you had them on at the same, one as they increase their medication? So I look at protein differently. I don't look at it as your total amount in the day. We know that we want protein at every pit stop. And then we also want to make sure that we're not getting in too much protein at one time, or it's just too difficult on the digestive system. I want them to pit stop for protein at every eating occasion. That's somewhere between 15 and 40 grams. And then when we look at the total, I might look at the 1 gram per pound of desirable body weight. I want to be really clear about that. Where things get messy with the 1 gram per pound of desirable body weight is above 200 pounds. When somebody's desirable body weight is above 200 pounds, we have to look at, can we tolerate, can we even figure out how to get in 250 gram protein, and do we actually need that? So that's where, you really want that personalization. But protein's going to be important. And then the actual amino acids. So we know glycine is important. I learned about that in collagen. We know creatine is important, and we're learning about leucine and making sure we're getting in those different amino acids. The other thing I think from a motility standpoint, as you rightfully and so smartly brought up, is the role of minerals is just so important. Yes, vitamins, absolutely. But the role of minerals, I find, I'm going to hazard a guess that I actually think it's more difficult for people to get in minerals than vitamins, just when we look at our food supply and when we look at processing and some of the loss of nutrients there. And yes, you can obviously say vitamin D and then throw that out with the bathwater, but let's say other vitamins. Minerals are going to be so important because they're also what your body needs for your blood sugar and your metabolic health, and then also for hydration. So the other one I would say is hydration. We have a quick hydration experiment. We have people drink 8 ounces of water, see how long it takes them to pee. If you have to pee within 2 hours, you're not optimally absorbing it. And we want to make sure you haven't just had coffee or alcohol, these other things. But we've got to optimize your hydration in that status. And then you also want to turn around and say, it is not about getting rid of fiber and fats. Fiber and fats are going to be so important. They're going to help fats are going to help us promote a healthy inflammatory response and dictate what kind of other hormones are being formed, right? So just because your peptide hormones that are the switch are turning it on. They then enact other hormones that are steroidal. So your fats and your protein, they're going to be directing that formation. And then fiber is a really interesting one because in somebody's gut, how they respond to fiber and how much fiber they can consume at one time is really going to be dependent. And what I found is, and this is really important to have a lot of conversations, guys, when you take a patient and like over deliver to the moon with them when you first put somebody on one of these medications, or if you're trialing it out yourself, because days 1 and day 2 of the medication, you feel very differently in terms of your bowels. And especially when you go up on a dosage than say days 3, 4, and 5. And then you actually feel very different usually on days 6 and 7. So you may actually want to help somebody within that space. And then one I think that doesn't get enough attention is the caloric window, because when you're consuming your calories, you may actually really need people to start consuming calories earlier. You might be very comfortable with them finishing earlier, but you may need to shift their window earlier, which I tend to think is good for like almost everyone on that part. And to look at that window and then to look at, are they not eating all day and then, backloading. So they're eating timing behavior, I think is all really part of that as well.
It sounds to me like the conversation you're having with clients is, we're going on this journey for your whole person health and metabolic health. And that's going to include the following changes to your nutrition, your lifestyle, your habits, and the following tools, which may include a medication. And if we choose to use that tool, here's what that journey is going to look like. You need to commit to doing this with your nutrition, coming in for this many follow-ups, making sure you're aware of side effects and being proactive about managing them proactively so they don't occur, and then reaching out to me if they do occur so we can make changes. So it sounds like it's a really big conversation. And that eventually, there's also an endpoint that you guys are agreeing to, and you talk with them about how they are going to successfully transition off these medications. Is that accurate?
First of all, I'm not a big believer in big conversations. That can overwhelm people. And I also feel like I can't make these guarantees. So we have the experiments, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about it. But I do think what you're doing is you're alerting them to, these are the things that are on the table for consideration. And we actually don't have to make a decision about it today. I will say this, the endpoint conversation is a very difficult one to have in the beginning. So instead, we might just want to acknowledge that right now we're thinking about, and I've had people have just said to me, I just want to get off this medication. Like I want to lose the weight and I just want to get off this medication. I've been like, well, why? And he's like, because, one that comes to mind is like, I just think that they're so bad for you. And I was like, so let me actually talk about, like, let's dive into that. Or my wife just thinks this is the worst thing for me. Okay, well, if you'd like me to have a conversation with your wife, or if you'd like us to record this conversation, let's walk through that. Or my other doctor is telling me it's so bad. Okay, well, if you'd like me to have and so, being able to talk through that. And then I have people that are like, I need to be on this medication forever. I've literally never felt this way. I'm 50 years old and I've had 48 years of a horrific relationship with food, with all of this stuff. I hate it. And I honestly don't care what I ever eat. I'm probably not going to be good at my nutrition, but I just want to stay on this medication forever. And I said, okay, so cool. So I need to have you take these supplements that we've personalized for you. We probably need like a quarterly look at what's going on just to make sure I'm not missing anything. I do need you to exercise, especially some strength training. So let's see if we can get that. And so then we'll break it down into some smaller bits. I'm not going to start off and have that person. I've said to her, I'm like, I'll be interested 2 years from now. And we're about a year and a half in. She has such a much better relationship with food now, but she still is like, I don't want to like food. That's just what she said to me. And there's still this belief that I've been this better version of me for a year and a half. But I have 48 years of not having been that better version of me as I see it, right? Because remember, mindset, it's beliefs. They're not truths. So like she just sees, all of this stuff. So I'm like, okay, let's just not talk about it. So you also have to be prepared to table conversations. And I will say as whole person health and root cause practice, we're sometimes not good at tabling conversations. We sometimes just want to tell people what we know about them or what we know in this situation. Take a beat and don't have that conversation. And maybe we might need 5 sessions together. You might work with me 1 or 2 times, and then you might be working with my coach. I'm just going to set this expectation. The minimum, the absolute minimum is that I need to know that we're checking in anytime that you go up on your dosage. If you're traveling or something is going to change, you have to promise it. And we literally outline that in a contract. People are interesting when they sign a contract. they actually like give it a little bit more attention. You know, they're like, I mean, and especially if it's tied to whether or not they get the medication anymore, right? You know, on that part. Yeah. So I think it's an important role. This is all relationship management, which is why I think those of us that have been working on relationships with our patients are a little bit more successful, you know, quite frankly, in that part.
Food addiction is real. The food noise is real. And I deeply understand the people who take medications like this and feel like they've experienced that freedom for the first time and how life-changing and life-freeing that is. And so I actually want to dive in for just a minute here and talk about that food noise and that food addiction and options that you and I know are also available to help with that. Because I think the media has done a beautiful job at illustrating how some of the newer medications on the market are helping people with the food noise. But clinically, as someone who was doing functional medicine with folks, particularly in the mental health space, who is only in functional medicine because I had an eating disorder that turned out to be celiac and basically got cured in 3 days. I know that there are, exorphins in foods. The highly processed foods are designed to be highly palatable and addictive. There are a number of reasons someone may struggle with food thoughts and food addiction. Insulin resistance is going to make you feel like you're starving even when you have just eaten. So could we quickly outline to people why might they actually struggle with some of this obsessive thoughts of food? What are some of the reasons we know to explore in functional medicine when someone comes in with that? And have you seen clinically that people are able to actually have that noise turned down using other approaches than the GLP-1 receptor agonists?
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so let me start off with, let's just call this modern day, right? So we'll just say 2024 is modern day. We did not need GLP-1 agonists in the 1600s or in the 600s, probably not even in the early 1900s. Then we started processing our food and many other things. Like there's industrialization. Then we look at sort of social media revolution. We could even look at the wearables, and now there's all this data that we can collect. So we are in an infobese environment. Like I diagnose infobesity in patients and non-patients and in practitioners like all the time. There's the disease of too much information where the quality of the information isn't even relevant. We're just overwhelmed by that information. So when we talk about food noise is a particular type of infobesity. And I think that there's probably two places for us to pull apart this concept of food noise. There is a part of food noise that we are starting to understand is more genetic, but it's also influenced based on the environment in which you grew up in, right? So it's also going to be, your mindset, so if from a young age you were told, no, you can't have this, or yes, or you were dieting, like all these different things. But then there's like the modern era, and just the fact that there is just too much stuff coming at us all the time about what we should eat, what we shouldn't eat, who we should be, what we should look like all of this different stuff. And there's like the mental health burden that this is putting on us. The third that I don't have the time to unpack here is trauma, right? So early trauma, and I'm also not the expert for it, but let's just recognize, obviously, I hope it's obvious that somebody's traumas are going to inform both sides of those. So when we talk about food noise and the freedom from food noise, there is a very real function when you take in 4 shots of espresso versus 1 shot of espresso. 4 shots of espresso goes in and it saturates. It does all the thing that caffeine does. Like in the case of it's going, like you are so dialed in and focused, right? Your system is so tight. You're so caffeinated, right? You're like, I could climb a mountain. Like this is on that part, as opposed to the 1 shot of espresso, right? And we also know that genetically, people metabolize caffeine at different paces. So what we find with the agonist, if the agonist is the 4 shots of espresso versus the 1 shot of espresso, which is like the normal amount and normal functioning of your switch hormones, is that, and also because it's not being stimulated this way, we're injecting it and it's because you got 4 shots, you've got enough to go to all of these different receptor sites and make sure that they get attention first and foremost. So they are flooded. They're saturated. Now they're on 24/7. So that means like while you're sleeping, there are also those messages. So there are some things, again, we've talked about side effects, some things that we need to look at on that part. But one of the upsides is receptor sites that may previously not have gotten attention because your genetic efficiency or just your body's ability or any of these other pieces, it hasn't been getting there. And for those folks, this is one of the reasons that I love using the medication, similar to how I might use an SSRI or other versions of, I'm not that schooled in the names of different antidepressants, but let's just use SSRI as like just to say antidepressant on that part. How then I can then go and do the work, right? So I can then go and do the work of how do I work on my thoughts? How can I now try something out and see and experiment with eating half of the cake or being there and realizing when I took a piece of the cake, it actually wasn't delicious to me. And so I was like, you know what? I don't actually need to have that. Or how could I be present at a meal and not be looking, and actually listening to the conversation? So in one way, we have agonists that can be this great tool for us. That does not mean that we don't do the work with the other tools. But what I have found is things like intuitive eating, which I love, and mindfulness, the practice of being mindful. For people who have true dysfunction in their switch, until they've been using the medication or possibly the one supplement that gets us, that we see at least now, gets us to that 600%, until we're in that space, it's been really hard for those other tools to work effectively. But that doesn't mean that they aren't a huge part of the toolkit. And so what I mean by that is there is no question that sugar, and I'll put artificial sweeteners and even non-nutritive sweeteners, are part of challenging our sweet taste buds, our pleasures, like overriding our pleasure. We know that those things are challenging. What I found is I haven't seen as much success in, or said differently, people who have tried to understand that. It's like the people who have been told to eat until you're 80% full, because they never understood what full meant. They don't understand that part. So I think what's important for us as practitioners is to recognize, first and foremost, to evaluate, like, why not work on it before you do the GLP-1 agonist and see, could we have successes there? Could we implement something before you sit down and eat? I do a test called when somebody takes the first bite of food or sip of food, a sip of a beverage, it's called the Better Be Delicious to Me test. On a scale of 1 to 10, how delicious is it? Well, if it's not a 7 or greater, I don't think it's worth it for you. Like, unless you have to, like, it's the only option that's in there. What I'm actually doing there is some mindfulness work. I'm having you pause as you're eating that first bite and evaluate, and do I want to make a choice? But when I've presented it in the past, or when it's been presented to others, and quite frankly, I didn't do it because I didn't tell people to do it because it didn't work for me. Try a couple of breaths before you eat your dinner. Just didn't work. So I think we have to recognize that our tools are only going to be as effective for an individual as where we're meeting them. And I think, on that part, if I can get you to eat better, make better quality food choices. I'm a qualitarian. Quality is one pillar of better nutrition. I want to focus on that. If you can eat regular colors instead of artificial colors, you're actually going to give your body antioxidants and you're going to get, a flavor profile. Any of that stuff, great. But if that's not working for us, that's where the agonist may be a different tool, that could be helpful for us in there. So I think I love the question, because honestly, one of my favorite places that I'm working on switch optimization is with mental health professionals. So I'm working with a small group of practitioners. We're working with individuals with diagnosed eating disorders where they're actually using semaglutide. This might sound like the craziest thing. It's not. They're using it to actually help somebody there with all of the brain conversation around their food choices, right? Now, this can't be we're obviously working on the nutrition intake, and that piece as well. So I just think there's this huge opportunity to do the mental health side of weight health better. And where some people need the agonist as a tool and some people don't. They just need to recognize, for those people, it's not a just. Mental health professionals also need to realize that every single one of your patients needs to be evaluated for digestive health, and every single one of your patients should be evaluated for the quality of their nutrition and the quantity and their caloric timing, and those kinds of things. So it's just not an either or in my mind.
Brilliant. So, okay, I want to pick your brain, and I know it's a lot for one podcast, but I have you here, so I wanted to do it. You had some cool interviews recently on SPMs, which not a lot of folks have heard about, including practitioners. Can you tell us what SPM stands for and what they are and why it's so exciting to talk about those right now.
Yeah. And I just have to give hats off, of course, to Dr. Sirhan, in terms of from a discovery of it. And then Dr. Kara Fitzgerald, who, as I've asked her about it, is, she was like, really, that was like a career defining. She's like, after him, like, from her learning about it and to be able to have that interview. Because when I heard that interview, so many light bulbs went off for me. And I was like, this is explaining so much to me on that part. So first of all, specialized pro-resolving mediators and the lipid pro-resolving mediators on that part. They are, so think of your essential fatty acids, they're compounds, and your essential fatty acids where enzyme activity has converted them into these now SPMs, we'll call it, or sometimes they're called pro-resolving mediators. Sometimes the specialized gets dropped. I'm not sure about the science there or whatever, but you might see PRM or you might see SPM, on that part. Now, for decades, we have had research, and I remember this like way back in the day because I was involved with early research on and early marketing and conversations around different fish oil products. And we've been looking at things like omega-3, and then we got even deeper. So you have your omega-3, which has EPA, DHA, and HPA, et cetera. And then we got into, well, just the EPA and the DHA, or just EPA, just EPA. So we were getting pretty refined in there. And there were these things that were happening where people would say like, oh, like research would come out at one moment, it was like, oh, that fish oil, really good research results. And then it would be like fish oil, not great research results. And I was like, well, first of all, there've got to be different kinds of fish oils. And then second, why is it that the research around eating fish, other than if we find fish that's contaminated with toxins, why is it that research is always good? Like that was just, I was like, what's in fish that's not in the fish oil? So that was my first question. And that helped me to see that there were different kinds of fish oils on the market where some were isolating down to just that omega-3. And then you had things that might have been like from the whole wild salmon where it was, 16 different omegas. You had omega-6, you had omega-7, you had omega-9. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So maybe what's interesting about eating fish is that you have all these different omegas. And I just carried that forward. And I was like, it's going to be important that we get in different omegas. And I love that because like I cannot live without my GLA. Yes, that's an omega-6 fatty acid. I call it my glamour fatty acid for my hair, skin, and nails. Like that's been my whole life, but then it's definitely been perimenopause, right? Okay, so dryness, like all of that stuff. So I need to get in all of those omegas. And I was like, that's the answer. And then we would see that we need to take in those and make sure, and there was this omega-3, omega-6 index. And it was like, okay, we really need to make sure that we're getting in more omega-3s because that's how we turn off inflammation, right? That's how we prevent inflammation. That's how we attack inflammation. We go in and we attack it on that part. But then I would have patients who were like freebasing the stuff. I mean, they're like, it was like more and more and more, and we would just still see inflammation. And so, okay, so now I'm going to look at, let's make sure that your sugar intake isn't too high, or let's look at your exercise. So then I was introduced to the world of genetics, and I was like, oh, some of us from a genetic standpoint don't necessarily metabolize with the same efficiency, we're not metabolizing those omega-3s the same. So maybe that's, what the story is. And then I learned about these pro-resolving mediators. So borrowing from another analogy that you may or may not be aware of, in our body, we have a detoxification system. It has a couple of different phases, but for simplification purposes, we're going to talk about phase 1 and phase 2. So in phase 1, we're coming in and we're like, okay, we need to make sure that these things are able to be eliminated. So we've spotted the toxins, but some of them need to be converted, what we call conjugated. And that phase 2 is critical because if they can't get to a form where they can be eliminated, so we learned about that. We're like, oh, we have to nurture both of those phases. And those phases have different nutrients associated with them. Well, guess what? Inflammation has 2 phases. There is the battle. There is okay, we're going in and we are going to attack and we're going to make sure that certain macrophages and we're coming in and we're going to just make sure that we've got what's in there to do the battle. The battle is won. We need to turn off. We need to clean up. We need to restore. We need to try. Remember, the body's always trying to get back to balance, homeostasis. We need to come in on that part. So what we've learned is that these pro-resolving mediators are actually, when the body uses the omega-3s and omega-6s, because arachidonic acid is important here. It uses those omega-3s and those omega-6s, yes, to fight it, to do the battle, but then it converts some of them, like down a different stream, it converts some of them, and they come over, and those are the ones that come in to do the cleanup work. So imagine if we go back to the old days, there was a war that was being fought and there were no cell phones. And so nobody knew that both sides had fought the war and one side had surrendered and it was over. And the battlefield, people just now needed to go get the wounded. They needed to restore the battlefield. They needed to clean everything up and go about and now live our lives. Well, because there wasn't a cell phone, the battle could have still been going on because people didn't get the message that over in some kingdom over, it had been sorted out. If your body doesn't get the message that it needs to turn, that the war is done, then your inflammatory response will keep attacking in that area. It'll keep doing battle. So your SPMs come in and they say, stop, it's done. They actually take all those away. They go and they bite it up and they chew it and they're like, off, be gone with you. And then they bring their team in and they say, and now we are the cleanup team. We're the ones that are coming in. We're fixing it. We're restoring it, putting the wall back together, etc. So autoimmune disease, cardiometabolic, risk of stroke, heart, all of this stuff, and genetics. If my body doesn't process certain fats as efficiently, regardless of whether I'm taking in enough of them, I might not be creating these pro-resolving mediators as successfully. So to me, this was like a huge light bulb moment. And it basically said to me, oh, wow, this is why it's so important and why research on societies and also research on or communities and also research on actual fish eating has shown it to be so helpful, because these are specialized pro-resolving mediators are in the fish oil if you don't extract and eliminate them. So the processing of your fish oil product is going to matter as to whether or not, that's in there. So what that said to me on that part was make sure that people are eating better quality fish and are consuming enough and also getting in better quality essential fatty acids. But here was the problem. Better quality fish, even fish, wild fit, like we can say wild salmon, we can say farmed, etc., microplastics, mercury, all this other stuff. So dietary choice, some people don't have a cost, some people don't have access. And so there are all sorts of factors. And so what SPMs as a supplement has done for me is that it has really helped me to be able to be more targeted and efficient when I am trying to more successfully modulate somebody's inflammatory response. I put it right up there with Kara and I. We came at it from different places in the conversation, me as a dietitian and her as a doctor. And I was like, I put my patients on it, and sometimes I put them on it over adding the omega-3s, which is not what is recommended, because some people, you've got to make sure that you still have those healthy lipid layers, and the healthy cell membrane. But we can get that from food. What I'm seeing is it's more difficult to get the SPMs. And so it's kind of like vitamin D for me, where I've been prioritizing that, or maybe like CoQ10 or, something like that. So I love it. You can tell, like, I'm obsessed with it. I'm not the leading expert, et cetera, but boy, is it changing the game. And I'll share one personal story. I was doing an endurance event this summer. So it was called Everesting. I was climbing 29,000 feet. And I had come into it. I had driven across country, so that wasn't better for my hip. And everybody's like, take Tylenol, take Advil, get in there. It's like, I don't think I'm going to be able to do that because that's so hard on my stomach. And I was already worried about, just how my stomach. And I used SPMs for like 2, 4, 6, however many in a day. And boom, it was so helpful for my pain, like the inflammation I was intentionally putting on my body, in that time period, as well as my recovery. And we've seen that with some of my athlete clients and, some other. So it's a game changer on that part. So I'm really happy that we have the advantage of it from a supplement standpoint. And I think what we're going to identify is that, because remember I said it's in omega-3s and omega-6s, that, for example, in plant compounds, and that's why we don't want to highly process our plants, because if we and do high extractions of these oils or high refinements of these oils, because we're probably losing some of the pro-resolving mediators that are in the plants or the animal on that part. Yeah, it's super fun.
It is. Yeah. So, okay, these specialized pro-resolving mediators, they're lipid mediators that are, how I'm picturing it, is they're metabolic derivatives of the essential fatty acids, of the polyunsaturated fatty acids. So arachidonic acid, EPA, DHA, right? You get those, you ingest those, and then those are broken down into mediators that act on a cellular level. And it looks like a lot of these act at the membrane level and guys, we'll link papers about this in the show notes, but to prevent the overreaction of the immune system and help to clean up inflammation. And so that's so much of what we're seeing with a lot of, even with COVID, but a lot of our newer inflammatory disorders It's really helping someone to actually balance that. And I'm with you. I mean, some of my clients were taking, 5 grams of fish oil a day, and that's what they would need to see results. But if we have a way to be more targeted and to actually get those results that we want by giving someone the end product we want them to have, it does seem really cool. So I'm curious, have you seen other results in your practice where you're using these that have made you think, okay, these are really something that I need to consider for more folks?
It's been a total game changer for me. As I mentioned, autoimmune disease. I'm using a little bit in pregnancy also, which is, I think really interesting on that part too. And I think in terms of, gosh, just so many different areas where you can turn around and be like, oh, this is a positive, on that part. And what's interesting is that lower dose, again, that plays out in finances. So I will say right now, these molecules are expensive. One of the things that Dr. Sirhan said, and even just in the almost, I think it was maybe 6 months, maybe as much of a year, because I don't remember when they recorded versus when his podcast came out, the time period of that and somebody like myself being able to use it. Now that we have these compounds available in supplement form, we're able to do a lot more research, right? We're able to do N of ones, or we're able to do small group research. And the information that people are sharing is really significant. So a lot of it with my GLP-1 work, sort of looking at that, I'm super focused on inflammation in the gut lining. And that has been something for me where I'm like, okay, how do I even counterbalance alcohol or steroid and can I reduce your use of NSAIDs, whether it's prophylactic or you're using it afterwards? Can I reduce that? Because this is going to be, especially those NSAIDs at a higher dose, this is going to be, more problematic. So a lot of really great opportunity.
That is awesome. Okay. Thank you for spending this time with us, for talking about these two leading edge topics in personalized nutrition. I just want to leave you with a minute here to let our audience know where they can find you, to have any last words. We're so grateful for your time with us today.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's a mutual love fest on that part. I'm loving you guys have really changed the game for me in terms of what I'm able to help my patients be able to do. Also as a dietitian, where certain states and, with ordering labs, so for me, I'm looking to scale personalized nutrition. So that's my mission. I believe that this truly personalized nutrition needs to be in place for all of us to enjoy better health and then kind of go on and do what makes our soul sing. So we've brought that together under my company, the Better Nutrition Program. So if you're looking for support in this area, or if you're a practitioner who's saying, this isn't my zone of genius and I can't do this, and you want to be able to partner, with on-patient care and be able to do that. And then we also have a lot of the different tools that I have mentioned, things like the digestive evaluation or the hydration quiz. Some of these are free. They're on our site. Go ahead and do them. And then other ones are part of the resource. We have a personalized nutrition resource library that's included in our memberships and gives people access to it, or that practitioners, can acquire for themselves. And then for me, I just love to have these conversations. So if we can have them, if you have a targeted area that you want to focus in on, I'd love to, come in and have that conversation. And then also to anyone who is a patient, which I hope includes all of us as practitioners, that the core of, or I should say at the center of truly personalized nutrition is you. And I think we all just do so much better when you share your case studies. So I always love hearing from you. I love hearing from you what's worked, what hasn't worked, especially if you were told hey, I have to do it this way and you did it a different way. So please share those with me, social media, wherever, because I think that the more that we can help share those, other people are going to find a path forward for themselves. And then we all get healthier, which is, again, the end game, the end goal for all of us. Yeah.
Absolutely. No better way to end than with that statement. Thank you so much for your time, Ashley. We will talk to you soon.
Thank you.